Today's discussion is very important and timely for several reasons, and none may be more important than reflecting on the struggle for civil rights and the successes and challenges since 1964. We have the opportunity today to hear from someone who has dedicated her life to fighting injustice. Mary Berry is a distinguished historian, civil rights activist, legal scholar, and educator, widely recognized for her lifelong dedication to social justice and human rights. She has played a pivotal role in shaping U.S. civil rights policy through her leadership on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, where she served as chair from 1993 to 2004. Appointed by President Jimmy Carter in 1980, she was one of the longest-serving members of the Commission and fought tirelessly against discrimination based on race, gender, and disability, even confronting political challenges during the Reagan administration when she was temporarily, perhaps understandably, removed but later reinstated due to her unwavering commitment. Berry is also a prolific author, having written several influential books on civil rights, history, and public policy. Her works, including Black Resistance, White Law, The History of Constitutional Racism in America, and My Face is Black, Is True, Carry House, and the Struggle for Ex-Slave Reparations, have contributed significantly to understanding race and legal history in the United States. Berry has been a vocal advocate for reparations for African Americans, underscoring the importance of addressing the lasting impacts of slavery and racial injustice. She also was one of the founders of the Free South Africa movement, where she was determined to end apartheid. Beyond her work on civil rights, Berry has been a trailblazer in the academia, serving as the first African American woman to head a major research university as Chancellor of the University of Colorado at Boulder. She is a professor emerita of American Social Thought, History, and Africana Studies at the University of Pennsylvania, where her teaching and research have influenced generations of scholars and activists. Berry's contribution to human rights, civil rights, and academia have earned her numerous awards, including the NAACP's Roy Wilkins Award and the Rosa Parks Award from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Dr. Berry will be in conversation today with our colleague, Dr. Marshall Chatelain, the Presidential Penn Professor of Africana Studies. Professor Chatelain is a historian and professor who won the Pulitzer Prize in History for her book franchise, The Golden Ages of Black America, which examines the intersection of race, capitalism, and the fast food industry. Her work explores the complex relationship between McDonald's and African American communities, highlighting issues of civil rights, economic inequality, and consumer culture. She is also the author of Southside Girls, Growing Up in the Great Migration, she also teaches about women's rights and girls' history, the U.S. civil rights movement, as well as Black capitalism. She is a respected voice in African American history, education, and social justice. Finally, this past spring, we marked the end of apartheid and discussed 30 years of freedom and democracy in South Africa with the former South African President Helena Bonte. And it is now appropriate for us to also reflect on the past 60 years since Civil Rights Act of 1964. And no one is better placed than our distinguished guest today to do justice to this. Both movements were significant in the 20th century and continue to reverberate today, unfortunately in ways that are sometimes concerning. With that in mind, please join me in welcoming Berry Francis Berry and Marshall.
Thank you very much. I made a few notes. I'm not going to give an actual speech. I'm going to simply because any young ones told me that I should write down a few notes and say what's on there. Otherwise, I'd forget what I was doing. And I'd say all kinds of radical things, and then people would, say, "Oh, I didn't know she was a whatever," So I wrote a few notes. Miss Carol, how do you do? I've miss you more than anybody else. I miss you more than Amy and Camille, Kufu, all the other people, Okay, well, anyway. So I'm gonna do these, few words, and then Marshall's gonna ask me a bunch of questions, and then I'll see if I can answer them, and see if I can answer yours. I thought that, first of all, I would say that I understand, before I do anything else, that the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act is important, 64, and that I ought to say that its impact on sex discrimination and the passage of all the laws that were passed after it, disabilities, the elderly, and women, athletics, and so on, all of which I happen to be in policy positions and being an activist the whole time all that was happening, and have written books about how all of us did whatever it was that we did. The Act's passage also prepared the way for, of course, the Voting Rights Act and the Fair Housing Act. But I thought that at one time that the Civil Rights Movement had laid a foundation for legal enforcement of equality of rights and opportunities for black folk, okay? And my hijira, my journey, which I'll tell you, because how do I know what I think I know, even if it's not accurate. It means that I always thought at first that all these laws and all this stuff was going to bring us to full equality. I was an activist and a writer before I became a notorious, George Moore called me, notorious public agitator. And before I came onto the public scene, as people being on, in those days, TV and every TV show and everything, whatever, all the rest of it. And it was then when I encountered the people who became lifelong friends until they passed away, and now until I do. My friends, Jesse and Loretta, and John Blessing, and Julie Bond, and Andy, and Andy Bond, and all the rest of them. I didn't know them before that. I was a student, I was a graduate student, I was a law student, I was an anti-war protester. I lied my way into Vietnam as to pretending I was a reporter. And traveled all over the country and wrote dispatches and did all kinds of stuff. And my family thought I was a fool. But anyway, and I have listened and observed all those people. But the world I see is a world from, I was thinking about this one time, Easy was talking the other day about he's a child of Jim Crow. The world I see is the world from the South Hall Plantation in Davidson County, Tennessee. That is the plantation. Now South Hall is a big resort, fancy resort. People go there, spend a lot of money and stuff. But the South Hall Plantation is where my family, they were all slaves. And there were 12 children on my mother's side, my mother being the youngest. And all the stories that we had before they moved to Nashville. And all of the working class in my extended family in Tennessee come from the South Hall Plantation. I just dedicated my latest book, which will be out in the spring. It's called Slavery After Slavery. The apprentice, supposed apprenticeship of black children, and what happened to them. And I dedicated it to all of those family of mine. But just being around, when people know a little bit of my history, people are always confused. Minerva Hawkins, my favorite high school teacher, to whom I owe almost everything. Unfortunately, she passed away some years ago. Used to tell me, Mary Frances, whatever you do, don't tell people how you grew up and how poor you were and all of that. And I said, why? She said, because they will just think less of you got to the morgue. You weren't in Jack and Jill, and you weren't whatever, and whatever. So don't tell them, and then they won't know. But you know what? I just go around telling everybody. I learned some things from research, from writing. I learned how to read, and my cousins, all of them were older. There's over 60-something cousins that I have who had their books when I was a little child, and I'd go to their mom's house, and I would hide over the room and try to read these books and learn how to read from that. Most of what I learned from Minerva. I learned from Jackie Jackson. I learned a lot from Jesse, and I learned a lot from Jackie. From Coretta, who was just managing her despair. That's what she was doing all those years. Coretta used to love to have these long telephone conversations, which I love to have with her. because even if she repeated some stuff, which I do now when I talk to people, I would learn each time some new thing that I didn't know all the beginning. I would watch and listen, and I would help when she needed help, or when Dr. Annenberg needed help. They'd say, "Man, Francis, you know what I think about so-and-so, write that up for me, because I got to do something to put it in evidence." I said, "What do you mean? I know what you think. You know what I think." But anyway, all of that happened. I learned from Roger Wilkins. You were surprised when the journalists of the Wilkins NACP family all passed on. Randall Robinson, my good brother from the Free South Africa movement days, Bill Lucy, who helped found the Coalition of Black Trade Unions, who just passed this last week. So he lied to me to the very end. I keep calling him up every day, saying, "I'm coming over to see you, Bill, because, we need to go and have lunch or something." He said, "Well, I'm too busy. I don't have time for you, Mary Francis." And he was in the hospital and didn't tell me. But anyway, I found that afterwards. From Sesame Counts and Sylvia Hill, the heart and soul of the sweet South African movement, and from sitting quietly with Nelson Mandela, sitting quietly in his serenity after prison, when he came out of prison, and chatting about nothing, just chatting about nothing. You asked me what we were talking about. I don't know, but I learned a whole lot. I learned from the young Al Sharpton when he started following us around. And I learned things that from, by the time I met all these people, this is the period in which Marshall's book about franchise covers. Because when I met them, and I was running education in the federal government at that time, I won't give you all the details, we don't have time, they were into business then. Because as Loretta explained to me, Martin always thought, and I call these people by their first names because I knew them. I'm sorry, I don't mean disrespect, but I didn't know Martin, but I knew him through Loretta. But in any case, she said, he told me that he always thought that if we got the Voting Rights Act and everything, we wouldn't have to march anymore. And we wouldn't have to have any more direct action because everybody would pay attention because we had to vote. And I said, "You really believe that?" She said, "Yeah, but after it happened, he saw it wasn't true." And that's why he turned to nonviolent civil disobedience spirit. And she said he got told off by 200 black folks in Philadelphia, Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, poor people who said, "You told us to go vote. Look at all these roaches around there, this pesto. And we're energizing here. We've been voting all the time. We said can't become the marching of that to vote." There got to be something else more to it. So that all of that I learned, and I learned the limits of these things and how far they would go. And that's why Mark wrote Where We Go From Here. And that's why he was with the deal with the Poor People's Campaign, left a legacy of you got to have hope, which Marty tries to carry on as best he can. I also remember that you need one or two well-placed politicians to get anything big done. And the politicians like to promote themselves, surprise. People would pick on Sheila Jackson Lee, but Sheila could always be seen pushing herself forward to get in the picture, And I learned early on from Jesse, told me, he said, Richard Nixon taught me to always get in the picture. And so, but people didn't get in the picture, don't get in the picture just because they like to be in the picture. It's because their constituents like to see them there. So we should pick up people like Sheila and understand that what they're doing is trying to do what they should do. The other thing is that when you're a purist, risk-taking activist, politicians want to be around your celebrity. And when politicians wanted to be around me when I was a celebrity, I thought, these politicians agree with everything I'm doing. How naive I was. John Cummings really wants to push this. We're going to get this reparations bill out of whatever. And I would go around talking silly foolishness like that, like I was a crazy person. But finally, John told me one day, he said, if you don't stop trying to believe in what you're saying and doing it, you're not going to have any political friends. So ain't nobody with that. Nobody's going to do any of this stuff. This is just posturing. It is just politics. You need friends, and you need a few. Also, I learned that using political leverage doesn't work to get what you need when you use it during campaigns. I've been trying to tell people that for years. Coretta explained it to me, and I try to explain to people for years. If you don't get what you want from a politician while they're running, you're never going to get what you want from a politician. You're a fool if you think, as people tell me every time there's a campaign, all we got to do is turn out the vote and then they're going to give us what we want. I said the triumph of hope over experience. You know, second marriages. So that indeed this is going to happen, it's not going to happen. After they get elected, there are a lot of people want things and whatever. And you just wait. We're doing the same thing this year, by the way. People tell me, my relatives. All we got to do is turn out the vote, and then we're going to get. And we're not. I learned some things through a Republican named Sam Jackson. I'm about finished, but Sam Jackson, who came to speak at the University of Maryland when I was teaching there before I went to Colorado. And he said to me, why don't you go and be a consultant in the Nixon administration on the executive order programs? All those executive orders that they passed, first race with JFK, and then sex with Nixon, and so on. That you couldn't be a government contractor, you discriminated, that whole range. And he said, why don't you see how they work it out? He said, they'll be happy to have you. I'll tell them that you know all about higher education, and higher education has a lot of these contracts. So I took off from the university for a while and went down there, and I discovered he was right. Because the first one I tried to get them to enforce, all hell broke loose. You got the secretary of HEW and all these people saying, you can't tell Columbia they can't have that money. That contract, they need all that money. Who are you to tell them? I said, well, the red says that they can't have it. And then I went up to Columbia and took the staff there with me, and we're sitting in the room, and the guy who was the object of the complaint that these women had made had gotten a good job, and they couldn't get it. He walks in the room, and the man who was in charge said, he's the guy, the preeminent personality and expert who we hired. We know he's better than anybody else. So there shouldn't be any question about whether we're discriminating. The guy took one look at me and ran out of the room. Think why? He recognized me from at Michigan when he was an assistant professor and didn't get tenure because he couldn't teach and he didn't write. And one of his professors at Columbia hired him. That's how he got the job. So when he saw me, he turned around and ran out of the room. Anyway, and so I learned that unless you enforce law, even though I was educated as a legal historian, the other thing I learned, and I got 2 more points and I'm through lunch. The other point I learned is that coalitions sound good, but they're not the end-all and be-all of everything. Civil Rights Act of 1964. We have coalitions which got all those laws passed. We started with March on Washington, Civil Rights Act, all the other things. And I say I was involved, so I know from what I saw. And that in fact, everybody worked together. We get race, we get sex, we get national origin, we get all these things together. Richard Delgado wrote an article, which I didn't read until about 10 years ago, in which he said that coalitions' usefulness can develop into stumbling blocks. Because some people in the coalition may not agree about the goals. For example, most Mexican Americans in the border areas who are activists believe that they should have their country back, that the folks came and took their nation. By good indigenous people who call themselves Indians out in the Lakota country, think that they should in fact have nationalism and control their own destiny as a priority. That's number one. Chinese and Americans, and for the most part, not so much Japanese, aren't there many Japanese Americans involved in this situation, think that while they're doing okay in this country, they would be doing, the middle class and so on, would be doing even better. And studies show that that's true. If they weren't Asian, they would have even more. We did some studies at the Civil Rights Commission that showed that. So that when people start sitting around and looking at their own interests, and then the final thing, they may not want to be in their coalition. And And also the other thing I learned through the whole history of the civil rights movement that I've been involved in is that every time there's an issue that one of the groups has, they want black people to take the lead. If it's the cannery workers in Seattle with the Asian Americans, they want blacks to define the issue in a way that we take the lead. If it is Latinos on the border or down in San Antonio who are dealing with an education civil rights issue, they want it formulated in such a way that black people will take the lead. You think about why that is the case. You're part of the coalition. When gays, we wanted the LGBTQ stuff passed, they wanted black people to talk about the black people vote as part of taking the lead. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that you have the people take the lead who in fact you think is better. And I read a book some years ago by a woman named Hacia Diner. This is my last one. Hacia Diner, who is a distinguished professor at NYU on immigration, and is Jewish, I'm told. I don't know her, but I met her at a conference. She wrote a book that came out in 1977, which she said she was trying to find out why there was so much Jewish altruism toward blacks. And she said when the Leo Flake trial occurred in Georgia, and he was lynched, the Jewish guy was lynched for supposedly raping somebody or something, which he didn't do. We're used to that. People getting punished for things they didn't do. But anyway, they realized, she said, that their relative prosperity was without protection against the same social forces that threatened black people. She wrote this, I mean this with her. Jewish leaders and organizations, she said, generally believed in civil rights for blacks. It wasn't that they didn't believe in it. But they also used that cause as a way of advancing their own interests. Launching all of these organizations at the founding of the NAACP. I used to wonder about, the founding of those organizations, donating money to all of them. And to this day, making sure that they are represented on the board of directors of every black civil rights organization. Every single one. And that they give enormous amounts of money to them. In part, it's because they believe in the cause, and it's part because they think it's in their own best interest. And the way she explained it, they thought that if you could explain racism or discrimination in terms of blacks, everybody knew about slavery. Well, it turns out everybody didn't know about slavery. But anyway, everybody knew about slavery, everybody knew about these things. And you could be able to formulate it better. So now what we have, I as a skunk at the picnic, will just say that, and I'm done, when I was down at the Congressional Black Caucus last week, which I hadn't been to for a while, we were talking about reparations, and everybody was talking about, glory, hallelujah, we're going to get reparations, glory, hallelujah, we're going to get reparations. And when I finally said something, they said, you got to say something. I said, okay. I said, I don't want to be a skunk at the picnic. But you guys got a whole lot to do if you think you are. Even you, the wonderful woman out in Evanston, who's done all this. And I'm so happy that they've all picked up the torch. Judy and Bonner and I used to sit around talking about how we going to get somebody to pick up the torch, And they picked up I told them, you picked up the torch. I really love it. My soul is rested now that you picked up the torch. But in case I said, you got a whole lot of work to do. Because she said, but we gave money to these people in Evanston, and we know we're being sued, but we got lawyers. I said, you're going to lose. And you're going to lose because we lost the 14th Amendment. And how did we lose the 14th Amendment? Maybe we had to lose it. I said, maybe we couldn't have gotten anywhere without losing it. Because the civil rights case, the slaughterhouse cases, which was the first case that decided what the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment meant, and most of my students never heard of it. Most lawyers I know at LDF, the place, never heard of it. That case, which is still good law, said that the one pervading purpose of the 14th Amendment, and the 13th and 15th was what? To raise the black from slavery to a position of equality with everybody else in the society. That's what the Supreme Court said. Majority opinion, never been overruled. And you say, well, what happened to it? How come people are suing us if we try to, use some money to elevate or do something? Why are people suing us if that's true? Because after Mr. Justice Miller and his colleagues went by the board, the other justices, we interpreted the 14th Amendment to protect corporations. That the due process clause, the equal protection clause, are all there to protect corporations from government regulation and government interference. It had nothing to do with black people. And we, our folks, didn't fight it the way, I don't know if they could have or if they would have. My understanding of the history, it would have been hard in those times. But we've never gone back to it, and we haven't even taught it to our people. So our people don't even know that it exists, okay? And I don't know whether it would help now, but I know we ought to know that it exists. If the one pervading purpose of all these laws was to elevate equality for blacks, unless equality for blacks has happened and I haven't seen it, or somebody might need new glasses, then in fact, that means we don't have it. So I said, I was stuck at the picnics, and what you need to do is go back to your lawyers, tell them to read the cases, and see if there's something in there along with their strategy, the group strategy. And I know because I'm on the board, most of them, I have been on the board and get money out of them, is that we'll just wait until the Supreme Court changes. And then the Supreme Court will change its mind, and then it will reverse all these bad cases that we don't like. And we'll keep our coalition together. But it may be that we have to do it. You see, I'm not absolutely stupid. It may be that the only alternative we have is to keep the coalitions together and pretend like we don't know that they're going to pervade the purpose. Maybe I shouldn't be telling people this. Because somebody might go somewhere and say that. And then we'd be in trouble. People say, oh, I didn't know. Or maybe if the case is brought, maybe the Supreme Court will say, well, we ought to overturn that. But hey, I'm not going to overturn it and act like I don't know that it exists. Anyway, so I am done, and the last thing relates to Marshall's work, is that when the money started coming, not only from the private sector and the franchising we talked about and all that, but whenever the Democrats were in to get these contracts and all that from the government, not just Jesse, but all the organizations, was something that we still sort of rely on now in the organizations. And thank you for letting me go on and on.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for that summation of
My life.
of your life in civil rights. And one of the things that I was very curious about in preparing for this conversation is a theme that you touched upon in your remarks, and that's gains and losses. And perhaps a gain and a loss isn't an objective reality, it's a matter of framing and context, right? And so when we look at the ways that the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 has been presented as a gain or a victory, I'm curious for the folks who were on the ground in those pivotal moments, how did you understand it in that period of time? And what were the maybe perhaps differing or conflicting conversations about it?
At the time, not knowing everything I know now, and none of us knowing what we should have known, I thought, all of us thought, well, this is great. And I used to make speeches about how some of us got through the window of opportunity. I got a whole speech about that, so I give over. And I would get all the stats on different people. Camille's good at stats, she knows about this stuff. All the good people who got through the window, who got in school. Like I got in Michigan, they didn't have any money to give me, so I had to work 8 hours a day, every day, and go to class in order to support myself. But they let me in. There were people who got into all kinds of things that they never would have been able to get through. So they got through the window of opportunity. And what has happened since is the window of opportunity has been steadily closing. And we haven't been aware of all the ways in which it has been closing. we're not sensitive, because I know from sitting inside the civil rights organizations, people have not been attentive to when you see the thing sliding and when you see something happening, like what happened, take, college admissions and how that goes, and Camille's done a lot of work on that. And who gets in the prestigious institutions and who gets the money and all that. We don't keep track of this stuff, and we don't know. And it all happens without us even thinking about it. And I've been a fool on so many things. When I got really concerned about transgender, mainly sex workers, for a project I was helping some people with, quite a few of them were murdered in Washington, D.C. on the street. And I got very concerned. So I called up the head of the Human Rights Campaign Fund, and I said, you guys are supposed to be concerned about, LGBTQ2, all this stuff. What are you doing about this issue? And he said, we can't do anything about it because it's not popular. And because we start raising those issues, then, hurt our picket fence strategy that they were trying to do on the family issues and all the other stuff they were doing. So I wouldn't take no for an answer. And so I kept raising it at the leadership conference. And I remember one time we got a big phone call with everybody on it talking about it. And finally they relented and said that they were going to do something about these issues. I didn't know that I was opening the floodgate. I was concerned about these women who were getting killed, or the people of men who were getting killed on the street, They didn't do anything about them. They went on all the other transgender issues, all of which we talk about nowadays. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying that I was about as much a fool as everybody else. I don't know what I expected. But people, Delgado's right, people interpret their issues and concerns in the light of what you are proposing, not what you think is going to happen. But at the time, we thought, this is great. A lot of people are getting, jobs they didn't have before. People are getting stuff that they didn't have to go. It's like when we started after Baki and we started the whole diversity inclusion thing. At first I thought, this is great. People are going to get jobs like president for diversity or vice president for diversity. And they're going to make a lot of money. And they're going to do, I was in my head while I'm running down the street. And then I thought one day, are you a fool still? When are you going to learn? And then I went on the air on TV. I was on every TV screaming and yelling about how the diversity thing wasn't going to work, because what was going to happen to it is what has happened to it. And Ken Tollett at Howard and I were the only two people, he's passed away now, who went on national television denouncing the whole thing, said that everybody else said we were fools. But anyway, folks got through the window. The black middle class did increase. Okay? We also have a class problem in the black community. We don't like to talk about it, but we do. People talk about how they want to help poor black people and they want to do this and that, but a lot of them don't, okay? They don't even know what I'm talking about when I talk about, eating hot water cornbread, whatever it is we had to eat, and drinking orange soda for breakfast, thinking that I'll get taller if I drink enough of it. Anyway, but but it did help. It was important. It was important for the reasons you give, people like you, the kind of work you do. It was important because some people got through the window, yes.
One of the topics we talked about at the Martin Luther King Jr. Awards with Dorothy Roberts was about who is the law for? And this is something that I think I've also struggled with in thinking about groups like the NAACP, saying, well, this is for school children who want to get into the door, but it was also for McDonald's and it was also for Exxon, right? Like, when we think about the work of civil rights, there's a kind of gravitas that comes with that term. But the reality is, when we look at the law and who it protects, there are some interests that perhaps make us a little uncomfortable. As you were serving on the U.S. Civil Rights Commission, and to the point that you made about who the 14th Amendment, 13th, 14th, 15th is for, how did your work on that commission both, reveal those failures in the law, and how did your work on that commission try to repair those breaches?
Well, I made myself distinctly unpopular in some circles. I was because I took on Reagan, which wasn't easy. took on everybody who on the issue, made the commission start doing something it hadn't done before, which was when it did reports, to report the side that disagreed with what they were saying and cite it, so that the people who came in wouldn't say, well, you guys didn't cite so-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so. I said, this is not about you just finding things that agree with what you said. It's about you taking on all the issues and making do. It was one of the biggest fights I ever had. The other thing was to insist on using the subpoena power, which we had, to actually subpoena government officials and make them come and make them present information that we wanted to try to do the reports. And to be willing to put myself and my colleague, Blandina Cardenas Ramirez, Bambi, on the line by going public and being seen publicly and attacked by people everywhere who didn't like it, saying that these things, this is not right, this is not doing what this is supposed to do, and collecting data. Because when I ran education, and people forget about that part of my career, when I ran all the federal education programs, the Carter administration, one of them was the National Center for Education Statistics, which is a very important agency. And I know how important it is to have data about stuff. So I would make them collect data, and I would go on the unlikeliest show. It's one of those talk shows. A guy just died recently who had one of the major ones all the time. They used to go on it all the time.
Phil Donahue?
Yes, I used to be on his show all the time. I was on everybody's show. But, and I would tell them, I'd put the data right in between the funny part so that people could see what was going on. And there was a method to my madness, so to speak. And so I got a reputation for being willing to take on anybody, to talk to them. Take the question of immigration. Let's take that for a minute. Immigration. I had an epiphany while I was just on a trip where I was trying to get some rest and didn't. I got caught a cold. And that I have been an open borders person. I'm crazy. I decided that one morning when I got up on this cruise ship. You are crazy. Why are you an open borders person? Well, I said to myself, because I'm helping all those people, I want them to be able to come here and, share with all the stuff, that we say, that I say. And this is great, and why should they be stopped? And, and we know what their histories are. At least I do, a lot of us do. So what's wrong with us doing that? And then I realized I was playing into the hands of my corporate friends who like open borders. Because what they want is workers that they don't have to pay and that they don't have to hire local people to do what they're doing. I'm sitting there on the bow of this ship, which I call the boat. Everybody kept yelling at me, stop calling that a boat. Anyway, it's a ship, saying, you are a fool. Mary Frances Berry, if Minerva was here, she would kick you. Why didn't you think of that? That's wrong. You don't want open borders if open borders means competition with people who are here already poor. And you don't do anything for the people in terms of the wages of those who do come and the conditions under which we know that they're all under. And you don't fight just as hard for policies to do that instead of going around being proud and saying, well, I'm for open borders. And so I'm going to stop being a fool. That was my epiphany.
Well, one of the ways in which, you talk about how the Black freedom struggle starts to stand in for a lot of ideas and a lot of fights. And the expansion of, protected classes over the period of time that you have worked on the issue of civil rights is really fascinating to me, because it's about making historical connections around disparate groups among audiences and populations that does not believe in civil or human rights to begin with.
Right.
So I'm very curious in work around age discrimination, on people with disabilities, on some of the work that you've done about around gender. How have those conversations how are they initiated, and then how do they become permanently entrenched in our conceptualization of what the law can do as we expand the reference points of protected classes?
Well, to give you a blunt answer, and then I'll give you a more intricate one, hopefully. The blunt answer is politics. That the people, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And the folks who mount the latest long-sustained financial campaigns and protests, in fact, get the attention. And their issue gets the attention because politicians are about two things primarily. Number one is what?
Money.
Getting elected.
Oh, and then that too.
Number two is getting reelected. That's what politicians are about. And so when you have the money behind you with the financial stuff, people asking me, how did Nancy Pelosi manage to get Biden out of there? I said, follow the money. It's the money. It's all about the money. But it's the money. You get your issue pushed up there. When we are weeping and crying and pushing and carrying on, talk about we need more police, something other, restraints and not killing people who are innocent and all that stuff, which is good stuff. We shouldn't have it done. And it shouldn't happen, right? But if we don't put the money where our mouths are, and all we say is, well, we vote, then there are other people who give contributions, who, when the disability rights movement, I have to give them credit, they were one of the best, and are one of the best organized movements. I love the whole disability rights structure and the way they do it. When they were getting ADA and when they were getting the executive order before that, all the rest of it, they kept everything tight. And in fact, we learned some of that when we did the Free South Africa movement, that you got to keep the structure tight, you got to keep the message in-house, you got to not let people in on what you're doing, and you got to do what you're doing and take whatever risk you have to take. But if you open yourself up to everybody and tell them what you're doing, then what good is that going to do? It's not going to happen. So that what we did is at the commission, what we did is, first of all, I saw to it that we did reports about whatever the condition was of whatever group it was. We did one on disadvantaged women and their children in poverty, all about foster care and all the women, all the stuff Dorothy does. We did reports on everything that you could imagine, disability rights of every kind, accommodating disability in various forms. We did them, I made sure that we did them on every single racial and ethnic group. We had a whole year of doing things just on people claimed that they were discriminated against because they were conservative religiously. All those groups, the anti-abortion groups, all these people. I had people, when I first went on the commission, sending me fetuses in jars to my office because they thought, I was pro-choice. But in any case, the main thing is to get some thorough work done to make sure you included all the people who were against what you're doing in the work so that they couldn't say they weren't included and that you overlooked something. We didn't overlook anything. And then to be willing to put yourself on them. There's got to be somebody. Jimmy Baldwin used to tell us at Howard that somebody's got to go through the fire for anything to happen. And so you got to go through, somebody's got to go through the fire. Somebody's got to be willing to put themselves, out there on the line. You need the work and you need the research and you need the data and you need to argue your case and be able, you don't do the disadvantaged any service if you don't know how to argue your case. We used to spend hours practicing arguing our case. We practiced arguing our case on all the civil rights issues. We practiced arguing our case on the anti-apartheid issues. We practiced everything we did. We spent all our time working and doing all this stuff. You got to be able, for those who you want to help, you got to be willing to put it in language that ordinary people can understand, okay? And, if you put it in language that they can understand, and if you act like you say, okay? I try very hard, and I'm not perfect, but I try to be what I say people should be, okay? Even if it hurts, okay? And so if you can set an example and you can do stuff, and you have data, and you have a way of saying it and thinking about who you're talking to and who you're presenting it to. Data by itself is not enough. A nice report by itself isn't enough. None of that is enough, okay? And even in this day and age, when now, I did some Instagram, and somebody said, you should do Instagram. I said, why? They said, because everybody's doing Instagram. So I went on Instagram and I put on my little t-shirt that said, history, size, and then repeats itself. That's what my shirt says. But I said something about something that happened, and people said, you're very wise about this, but you're very unreal. So I told my friends, I'm not doing any more Instagram because it's not, maybe I'll do TikTok. I don't know, maybe I can dance or something like that.
The whole world is on TikTok.
So ask me something else.
Okay. I'm curious about your relationship with kind of maybe the two institutions that have been, deceptive is the wrong word, but the two institutions that have probably been most troubling around the issues of civil rights, and that is, the White House and higher education. And I'm curious from your vantage point of having seen every moment in which the sides are happening and the replaying of the history happens, what do you think were the key inflection points, both in your time on the Civil Rights Commission or just your observations of the White House as administrations changed, and then changes that you saw in higher education that you think, in many ways reflect some of your concerns about civil rights?
Well, I think, let me take higher education first. I think the corporatization of higher education ruined it, okay? We became too concerned. I mean, when I ran a university, I don't know, I made peanuts and had a car or something. It became, when they became CEOs, and you got all this staff, and you got all these things you do, and things you do in part because students want them done. Like people say, why did they build all those student activities, buildings and gyms and stuff? Because students want it. They figured it attract students. But the conception of the university, not as a place where its leadership expressed principles, which had happened in an earlier time about anything, even the principles of, in DC, I walk over in Georgetown at that little park where the statue of the Virgin Mary is, right behind the gym when I go for walks. And I went over there one day and I almost cried. Actually, I did cry because somebody had upended the statue and stuck the Virgin Mary's head down in the mud, okay, just like that. And I thought, how could someone hate, even if you're not a Christian, why would you hate the statue of the Virgin Mary so much that you have to pick it up, the big statue, and stick the head down in the mud? And I sat there and cried because it's a beautiful garden and I go there all the time and sing. I come to the garden alone. It's one of my pleasures. And so I went out and I went in the gym and I asked people if they knew who did it. And they said, we don't know, the police are trying to find out. Some vandals came over here and did it. Maybe they, I said, this is a university that's supposed to be Catholic. And you got this garden and you got this Virgin Mary. And you mean somebody came up here and did this and you still haven't figured out who did it? And they're still trying to figure out who did it. I guess what I think is that I like the universities, the time when the ones that I was around actually stood for something. I mean, the leadership of the university. Robin Fleming at Michigan, who wasn't afraid to stand up in front of the National Guard and the police when we were protesting and say, have you guys ever heard of the First Amendment? And to say, you're not coming on this campus. No, you're not. There's nothing going on that I can't handle. Who came to see me years later when I was running education, came to my office and sat and looked at me and said, you were one of the people that took over my office. He was there to ask for some money. Anyway, he got the money. I like that. And that's unreal because what has happened to the society in general means that you can't go on that way and not everybody can take those risks. what has happened, you said the university, what was the other one?
The White House.
The White
For
House.
the presidential.
I do not believe, I'm probably the only person in the United States who thinks this. I do not believe that politics is any more corrupt today than it was in all the history of politics. The history that I've read and the history that I've experienced and the way people did things all those years. It's all money talks, money walks, PR works. Some people are better at it than others. Ronald Reagan, who the American people don't know anything about, a lot of people think Reagan was one of the best presidents we ever had. The guy was a right-wing guy who wanted tax credits given to schools that discriminated against black children and wrote something actually telling the administration to do that. And people had to go to court to stop him. He fired me for criticizing his civil rights policy. I sued him and won the court case. The guy, and I, he was nice to be around, big smile on his face and everything. He was, a happy warrior. But in fact, and he didn't do anything any worse than what other people did. That's my point. The most honest president I met during the whole time that I was doing all this stuff was Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter he's honest. Whatever he is, and he's still alive. They made us, when he was 80-something, 90, all of us who had been in the administration had to write little things about him so they could announce when he died. But he didn't die. I said, he's not going to die. They said, he's dying now, Mary Frances, you got to write something because all the other people are a bunch of white men who are still around. So we need you. I said, here I go again. Anyway, and so that guy was principled. And he would do things like, he'd go out of his way to do things, to show, putting solar panels on top of the White House and other stuff that he believed in. He could be crotchety, but he was smart but everybody else that I dealt with, Bill Clinton I liked hanging around Bill, and I loved the jokes, and I hated going to the White House all the time because he and Hillary couldn't stand to be by themselves, so everybody had to come to the White House all the time, have dinner, sit around, whatever. And I would leave early and say, I'm going home and go to bed. And they'd say, you're not supposed to leave before the president leaves. I said, well, the president ain't gonna tell me when he's gonna leave. But in any case, I couldn't believe that he did what he did with Monica Lewinsky. I went around defending him for about a month, trying to picture him doing that, trying to picture him doing it. And people said, he did it right here. And I said, where? And I'd walk over there and look. Say, I can't believe, you mean he was over there? He made me so mad. The rest of us all so mad. Bill Clinton is a politician, and was a politician. Other presidents, let me see, White Houses all run the same way. You give patronage to the people who supported you and who gave money, and their friends. That's what you do. Because there are any number of people that can do a job. It's not like, you have to pick people that didn't give anything to do the job. So I don't see, and I also don't buy the arguments that people make that if the election goes one way or the other, the country is going to be destroyed. America will be over. America's not going to be over. The United States is not going to be over. I don't care. We've had awful people elected president. We've had liars, cheats, everything else you can imagine. People who stole, who did everything else. But I understand the politics of it. You tell people, if you don't do something, your country is destroyed. And then they run right out and say, okay, I got to vote because I don't want the country to be destroyed. And then they don't think about what it is they want and whether they will get that or what's going to happen to the rest. So I don't believe that. I believe we're too strong to be destroyed no matter what happens.
Well, one final question I'm going to ask before I open it up for the audience. I'm just curious, anniversaries are always a little complicated because I think that we're very drawn to a happy ending. And so upon this 60th anniversary year of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it may not be a full-on eulogy, but it might not be the strongest words of congratulations. How would you characterize the Civil Rights Act at 60?
The same way I characterized it when I started talking, that it had some good things in it And I praise the expansion of it and all the rest of it that it's done for various groups of people. I don't have any problem with any of that. But I see the defects and I see the problems. And I see that Black folk have been left out in terms of our becoming getting full equality in the United States. And that we have to be aware of that. Not that we have to throw out, say the baby with the bathwater, whatever that is. Bathwater with the baby with the baby. That you don't have to do that. But you have to realize the flaws. And you have to think about, it may be that we cannot fix it. It may be that the coalition route is the only route, and that we just have to wait, and maybe we'll get another court, or maybe we'll get, they'll decide something different. I also don't think that when the court does decide something, that they're doing it in a venal way, like they're sitting there, the judges are sitting there, and I know a couple of them. The judges are sitting there saying, how can I stick it to these people? I'm going to decide this, and it's really going to stick it to them. I don't think they do that. That's not how their minds operate. They have things like Clarence Thomas, who, I've known him forever and can't stand him. But Clarence Thomas he believes whatever he believes. If he wants to believe that, he can believe that. So I don't think people are venal altogether. And so I think change can come, and I think that the Civil Rights Act of '64 can be a basis for it if you understand and don't reject what I said about it being the coalition part being an issue. Poor Hazel Diner, when she gave her talk about her book at the convention where she gave it, people tried to run her out of the convention for having the nerve to get up and say what she said in her book, and she was not even thinking about it. It was just another immigration book to her that she was doing when she was doing it, and she was telling the truth. And people had to quieten down the folks, say, some things you shouldn't say, say. So I think that the Civil Rights Act was a great accomplishment. I think the people who marched, including my little brother, who went to jail, and all the rest of the people, and all of the great heroes and the people in the streets and the women and children who were in the prisons in Mississippi and everywhere else in Louisiana, and all of them, they did us all a great service. And I think that what has happened for equality for other groups is important, and I support that. And that's why I said at the outset, we should praise. There's a lot to praise. But you got to be aware. Well, you don't have to be. Nobody has to be aware of anything. I'm aware of the defects.
Well, we are all aware and very grateful for the incredible contributions you've made. Please join me in thanking Dr. Francis. Let
me take up all the time, and therefore you can't ask any questions.
Pardon me? Should I call for questions?
Anybody got a question?
We have time for a few questions. Yes, in the front.
Dr. Berry. Oh.
Yeah, we'll use a microphone for the recording.
Thank you. Dr. Berry, you mentioned the 14th Amendment. I have some high school students here. What should they know about the 14th Amendment?
Okay. Oh, you guys are high school students. I thought you were a professor. No. The 14th Amendment, after the Civil War was ended, the Republicans controlled the Congress, and they passed, in order to get an amendment passed, you pass it in Congress and then it's ratified by the states. That's in the Constitution. Okay, that's how you get an amendment to the Constitution. And so they passed the 13th Amendment, which said slavery, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist, so they could get rid of slavery and involuntary servitude. Although there are a lot of arguments about whether being in prison is involuntary. We got all argument, but that was the point. They passed the 14th Amendment, according to the court and to the documents and the history of the thing, because they wanted blacks to be able to have equal rights with everybody else in the society coming from slavery. That abolition wasn't enough. You had to be able to, there was a law they passed in 1866 saying that blacks had the right to make contracts, to get married, to do all the things other people could do. And that was challenged on the grounds that nothing in the Constitution was a basis for you passing a law like that. So they put the 14th Amendment in to be ratified, to become part of the Constitution, so that when people claim that you don't have the right to all these things, you would have the right to them. And as the court said, Mr. Justice Miller's Slaughterhouse, that it was so that someday you could be on a basis of equality with everybody else when it came to things like, jobs, livelihood, getting married, going all the things that people do, and having due process in the court and all the rest of it, that you would have that. And the 15th Amendment was put in so that they had said in 1867 that black men could vote in a law that they passed, military reconstruction. Black women, of course, could not vote. Women did vote. So what they did is they said, we're going to put in the 15th Amendment, which will make the right to vote enshrined in the Constitution. Still didn't apply to women. Enshrined in the Constitution. And so they wanted to make these things have a constitutional, strong fabric, so you couldn't easily overturn them. Just say, it's just a law Congress passed. Let's go up there next year and get them to get rid of it and get something else. It takes, in order to get an amendment to the Constitution passed, you have to get first 2/3 of the Congress or 3/4 of the states to ratify it. That's a lot of states trying to get it. The women found that out when we were trying to get the Equal Rights Amendment. That's hard to do. I wrote an article once called How Hard It Is to Amend, which got a prize, actually. I was surprised it got a prize. It said that the Constitution was deliberately made hard to amend. It was put in so you could amend it if push came to shove. But we didn't want people going around every day talking about, let's amend the Constitution. So that's supposed to be the bedrock of our rights. And what I was complaining about when you heard me complaining earlier was that we don't know that. We don't know this, haven't known this for years, have ignored all that, and that the 14th Amendment has been used for all kinds of things, but not to give full equality to black people. Did you understand that? Did I make it clear? Okay, I tried that. Yes.
I am always so thrilled to hear you. And when I know that you're in Philadelphia and speaking, I come and I
Well,
have
thank you, darling.
$5 in pork chop sandwich.
$5 in a pork chop sandwich, yes.
Anyway, it seems to me, in terms of the presidential election, that I seem to recall that when Jesse Jackson ran for president, that it was clear to me at that time that we did not directly vote for Jesse Jackson. And who we voted for, what was on the ballot was his electors.
Right.
But I can't get anybody else to remember that. And now that we're voting for Kamala or Trump, their names are on the ballot,
Really?
not the electors. Is that?
Well, I haven't actually looked at a ballot. I guess I have to. But I have some at home. They sent me an absentee one, but I didn't even look at it. But you are correct that the way the Constitution works, electors are picked who are electors for the specific candidate, like Jesse when he ran. And when you vote for those electors. Then the electors meet and they cast their vote in their state. And then they send a slate up to DC.
But the current mail-in ballot, because I've sent mine.
It doesn't have the electors on there.
It has Kamala and it's got Trump.
What state is
The
this?
electors are not.
What state is-
Pennsylvania?
What's wrong with y'all? What's the matter with you? I don't, but there are electors, they have to be. There must be some kind of, I'll look it up. Whenever I don't know something, I always look it up. So I'll find out, but that's very interesting to me, yes. Electors is what you vote for, not for the candidate themselves.
They're not identified as electors on the ballots. They're Congress and Senate seats. And we have 11 of them in Pennsylvania. based off of our population in our states, but, so Bob Casey being running for Senate would be one. So you're voting for them, but they're no longer identified as electors, they're identified as the position in which they're running. But those are the seats that we get, like the electoral roll has seats, we get 11 of them in Pennsylvania, but it's not reflected in that, it's like we vote and we get the popular vote. And then, hopefully, we voted in people who are aligned with our interests. And then they will cast an electoral vote that should, unlike in 2016 when Hillary won, but they went against what the people did, that should back up what we do. But I've never seen an electoral section on there, and of course, I was not old enough to have voted for Jackson. But from since I've been voting, it's always been those positions, and that's my understanding of electoral ballots.
Well, I don't buy it. There's something wrong, something smells,
No, it's right.
because that doesn't make any sense. You are supposed to have electors, and that's who you're supposed to vote for. And if you don't, then something's wrong. I mean, nobody has the right to unilaterally decide that there won't be any people called electors. And therefore, you just vote for whoever the candidate is and then hope that they will vote and be an elector for the person that you voted for. That doesn't make any kind of sense. Does that make sense? You know, am I exaggerating? It doesn't make sense to me. I mean,
The whole thing is crazy, yes.
it's crazy. I'm gonna have to look it up. Maybe I'm just misunderstanding.
Yeah.
So what I need to do is some research so I can understand something. That's what I will try. I will
From
try
what
to.
I understand, it's been about 700 lawsuits in terms of trying to
Oh, my goodness.
dismantle the electoral process altogether, right? Because the idea that it came out of slavery, right? And it was trying to balance weights with smaller states and other states and in that, sometimes those electoral officials don't represent the interests of the people. And so there's been quite a bit of laws trying to change that, which has caused some ratifications, hasn't been fully done away with, right? But there's been some changes, and I'm not exactly sure when the changes have, but I've been really paying attention and following it, because unlike what everybody else in 2016, I really wanted to know how we got to where we were and how that went, and that was my understanding of it. So any information we find about that, if we could share that back, I would love it.
We could have some of these intelligent people who are students or here at Penn, who somebody might get to look up something. I don't mean right this minute, but they might be able to look up. So, always what happens with me is when questions are raised, I can't get anybody to do anything. I end up having to do it myself. This book I just wrote about the forced apprenticeships of Black kids after slavery. I was on all these calls with Sandy Darity, who's my good friend, who wrote that book about, what is it called, The Wealth of Nations, whatever that thing he and his Christian wrote. And he had me on the phone with him all during the pandemic with a little group, listening to them talk about his book, because he wanted to make sure And one day I said to them, you folks are talking about reparations. Do you know what happened to all those thousands of Black kids who were in fact pushed back into slavery after abolition or against the will of their parents? And their parents went trying to get them, and most of them couldn't get them back. And we don't know what happened to them. Do you guys know? Are they a cause for reparations? And their families and everybody in the room, all these experts who've been on the phone forever, nobody knew anything about it, never heard about it, didn't know it happened, and didn't know how to. And I said, can I get one of you young people to go and research that? Nobody wanted to do it because they didn't know how to start, and they didn't know what. So what happened? I ended up having to do it. So I did all the research. And even during the pandemic, when libraries were closed, I made people open up places. And then I traced the families after I did the court cases and found out who all these people were and wrote their stories. I traced the ones I could trace up to the late 20th century to see what happened to their families and what happened to them. And were they ever able to overcome all that trauma and the stuff that happened to them and Were they still working class poor people just like my Southalls? And most of them were. I found a couple of them weren't, but most of them were. They struggled all their lives. And they died from things that Black people die from all the time. You know, black man's disease, woman's disease, heart disease, diabetes, uncontrolled, like my great-grandfather. All the rest of it happened to them. And they went through all that trauma. And their stories, and over hundreds of thousands of kids. And nobody ever bothered. And the students weren't interested. You know, I said, I'll show you how to do it. So what do? Yeah, I'm walking around here. I should be able to go and read mysteries, you know. Read that woman Penn that writes about Canada. People keep sending me books, mysteries by her. Oh, $5 in a pork chop sandwich, which you mentioned, was about how voter fraud still exists. And I had cases where it exists, local cases in Louisiana mainly, where every governor has gone to jail, except the one we got now. And I did all this stuff. I had all the wiretaps and everything else from a young Black guy who was an investigator for the state, who got all this information. And it was disappointing because we didn't get anybody to prosecute anybody. They were buying votes. That's what they were doing, buying votes. And finally, I didn't believe it. And then he took me over to see this old lady, Miss Williams. And Miss Williams said, I've been selling my votes since I was a girl. She said they would come by here and they would take you down and tell you to go, the numbers to vote, the numbers you vote on the ballot. And you'd say a particular clerk and you'd vote those numbers. And you come out and then they take you to the daiquiri shop. They're driving daiquiri shops in Louisiana. And they would buy you a daiquiri or whatever you want to drink and get you a pork chop sandwich. And she said, I love that. And I'm not, she was 90 something then. She said, and then they take me, you know, and bring me back and so on. And she said, that's so good because these politicians come around here and you wouldn't believe it, she said to me. And they said, we're going to put a roof on the schoolhouse. It's leaking. It's been leaking for years. And they never put it on. We vote for them and they don't put it on. But at least I get my pork chop and I get my $5 that they give me and I get my daiquiri. And so I called it $5 in a pork chop sandwich. Nobody wanted to, all my friends who review books and all the major things, papers, didn't want to do it because they said, voter fraud is supposed to be something that Republicans only do. So we can't talk about other people buying votes because, you know, that distorts the message. We don't want to interfere with the messaging. So that's what $5 in pork chop sandwich is about. And people used it to organize in several New Jersey towns where they had corrupt mayors and got one of them kicked out recently. I'm done. Are you done? Anybody got anything else?
One more question.
Our last question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bird. This has been incredible. So I have a question for you as an organizer. Because I'm getting more and more involved in abolitionist organizing in Philadelphia. So my question is, how do you balance, like as an organizer, being involved enough in the systems around you to be effective in the change that you want to make, but removed enough that you can be radical and like that change can actually change those systems that you like are a part of? Like, what does that balance look like, and what does it look like in your life?
Well, what you do at first, until you learn the ins and outs of what the people are doing, is you slide through everything. And people think that you're just some person that doesn't know anything, walking around, listening to everybody, whatever. Isn't she a nice girl? Whatever, until you find out what they're doing. I found out what people were doing first. I didn't raise any complaint until I knew exactly how they did, everything they did. And then all I did was use it for the benefit of the people. That's what I did. And so when you do that, so you don't make objections. A lot of young people I know, and when I was younger, I was tempted to do it, want to make aggressive objections to things when they're not empowered. When I say empowered, enough empowered that they can protect themselves and that they're safe and that they can use it for the people. It doesn't help to take risks where you end up failing, and you don't do anything for the people, and you don't do anything for yourself. You gotta be smart about what you do. So you pick your shots, and you learn how people do things, and you take advantage of the way they do them, and use what they're doing in order to get where you want to go. See? So they think you're coming over here, but then you come over here. And then they think you're coming here, and then you come over here. And they say, how did that happen? I don't know. But you gotta be, it's by stealth that you make sure you understand the intricacies of what's going on. I got most of my most valuable information, a lot of times, from both janitors and secretaries. I spent a lot of time, my whole life I've spent. The first thing I do when I went to Colorado, I went around to every place, sit down, talk to the secretary, talk to the janitors, talk to people. I knew everything that was going on their campus. I knew when it was going to happen, how it was going to happen. And some people don't know that. I did that here. I'd go around and listen to people, talk to people. People see me talking to people, say, why are you talking to the janitor? I say, my friend John Blessingame at Yale always talked to the janitor. And the professor asked him why. He said, well, my daddy was a janitor. So, what do you mean, why am I? So you can learn from people who have the information. And you listen, and you watch, and then you use it. That's what you do. You can't use what you don't have. And you can't just, be up front and say, I'm going to challenge the system. Well, get your head chopped off and you might not be able to do anything. But if you're going to get your head chopped off, get it chopped off after you do a whole lot. Okay? All right? Okay.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking Mary Frances.
Okay.